Okay, hi. I'm not going to quite do what Adam did. I'm not going to attempt to follow it. So what I have to say is I made one big mistake, and I would advise you not to do it. Don't send your pitch deck to your legal counsel, right? Because it's going to get cannibalized, and I got back was absolutely a completely different presentation. So as an industry, we've got to find out how we can get rid of lawyers, right? So if you can get rid of lawyers, we're gonna make a lot faster progress than we're making currently. So what we've been looking at is how can we strap on the existing architecture that we've got for legal and frameworks without having to actually get to the point. So we're currently at a point where you launch a token and you suddenly have to go through, is it functional? Is it equity? Does it have certain characteristics that may be construed in different jurisdictions? And one of the things we've decided, and we've gone back and forth to regulators, in particular in London with the Financial Conduct Authority, and they've actually come through and said, look, there is nothing stopping ICOs and tokens becoming a part of the existing crowdfunding system, right? There is an existing piece of legislation that exists in most jurisdictions, especially in Europe, that you can actually launch your token within, right? And you then are outside of this remit of having to waste endless time doing token economics, doing crypto economics, having to go to and fro, and trying to add function or new features to a token that what you end up is having a very different product than what you start from, because you're trying to follow a regulated landscape, right? So investing in businesses as a crowd token is what we see as a growth prospect for tokens throughout, right? So what do we do? The aim of this presentation is what is very different from crowdfunding, and what we have here is token generation events or token sales or ICOs. And in fact, very little, right? So what are we doing? We're reviewing companies seeking capital, standard what we do in crowdfunding today. We take a white paper from established startups or SMEs or companies that are already existing, and we ask questions directly to investee businesses that want to participate in their future, right? So I'll go on the next slide, right? Crowdfunding, right? It started in 2007 with a reward base, so you're all familiar with Indiegogo, right? And then it moved very quickly forward to equity-based crowdfunding in 2012. That's around the time that Europe became the center of this crowdfunding, as regulators who wanted to capture this new share started to develop legislation around it. So largely, crowdfunding has got a lenient approach, a far more lenient approach than you generally get from regulators in token sales or token generation events or ICOs, whatever you want to call it, anything based on this new economy that we're establishing, right? Because it's largely based on, from a regulator's perspective, is something that goes out to family, friends, communities, and people that you're in touch with, right? So what the irony is that no one has actually launched a tokenized platform as such directly within the confines of the existing crowdfunding legislation. So we went to our regulator and we said, well, what is it? And they've actually not 98%, 99%, and we would say pretty much any jurisdiction around the world that I've traveled to, they've not actually had any submission that said we're actually putting this token event as a crowdfund within your crowdfunding legislation, right? So now, the advantage with you doing it within the crowdfunding, if you're thinking of doing a token generation event, is that you can give them equity and you can give them tokens. You don't have to draw away from giving equity. You can give a different slice of equity. So you can say we release 5% equity and 50% in tokens, or whatever mixture you want, and you have got none of these restrictions I would say most of the legislation in Europe, the legislation we've looked at in Asia, and America's yet to be determined, but I would think it would follow suit. So the future, from our perspective, and looking at how a regulator is actually looking at this space, is that crowdfunding legislation will be transposed and brought forward and be included within a token generation event. Okay, so the platform to be established on the blockchain, what's the advantages? I'll quickly rush through that. You're all familiar. It records all transactions, is immutable. And the first example we're going to be doing of this is within the UK, where we've got a regulator who is extremely lenient. They've got a very positive attitude. It's a look and see. It's a sandbox type approach. Bring forward, bring your ideas, and they want to actually see this industry grow within the UK. Right? So the actual model that we establish is going to be pretty much the same. You choose the investment. You decide if it meets your criteria. You sign an electronic documentation. And most importantly, right, so KYC and AML is going to become a standard part. We call it whitelisting now, right? So you whitelist all your participants. That is pretty much what would be traditionally KYC and AML in crowdfunding. So you are seeing an alignment of the two industries, if not in letter, but in reality, right? So, and the only difference here is you're transferring your funds in crypto, right? And as we're seeing, you just said, Draper, on Coinbase is allowing you to interoperably swap your fiat into crypto and back and forth. So, you know, that friction we've had for the past 3 years is largely disappearing. So, what's the advantage? What's the advantage of doing it within this token generation event, as opposed to doing it just as a traditional crowdfunding raise? It's largely based around the ability that you can use a smart contract, right? So you can use the ERC20-like, and more importantly, you'll see the rise of ERC223, much more efficient, and you're able to do a few interesting things that I won't go into. But, you know, and as why we're all here, most token events allow you to create a secondary market, right? So this secondary market is what differentiates traditional crowdfunding from an ICO. You're immediately able to go and trade this token, right? And currently in all the legislation we've analyzed, there is nothing that actually stops this as a prerequisite from the regulator for not having to do your ICO within a crowdfunding platform. So what the big advantage is, you can own equity as well as tokens, right? So you can have these ICOs where you actually can have a vested interest inside of the ICO, and you can control the direction. So it's going to start to bring a greater degree of stability and a greater degree of actually being able to contain and move forward in a direction where currently you buy into the token. What actually happens, the direction of the platform and who actually manages it, who actually controls it, is largely outside of your hands. With the new model that's emerging, you're actually going to be able to have key shareholders, key influencers, having a bit of equity, possibly a board seat, possibly a non-executive directorship that can actually steer the ship and ensure those funds are managed correctly. Right, and going forward, you can actually offer dividends, right? You can actually have a mechanism in there in your smart contract that can pay out dividends on a quarterly, yearly, monthly basis, right? So, you know, in terms of this, most of you are familiar with crowdfunding, so I won't go in it in depth. But, you know, you create a campaign, you explain the business, you highlight the opportunities, you list and, you know, the model we're here, you have a token exchange type market where you list them on there, right? So investee businesses can actually put up equity, so they can actually put in 10%. And the interesting part is, what you're actually doing is you're tokenizing that equity, so you're fractionalizing it. So you can put 10% up and you can create 1 billion tokens from that. So, the actual contradiction is not there. It's an imaginary construct that we've put in ourselves. It's not actually a reality, right? So there is some caveats. So currently under the legislation, if we want to do it fast-tracked and streamed, up to 5 million will be the hard cap. So if you want to raise up to 5 million and you want to do it in a quick, efficient manner, then you can do it within the legislation and you can do it as of tomorrow, right? If you want to raise above 5 to 50 million, there's an increased level of due diligence. You have to have your prospectus vetted and authorized, and any documentation agreed by the regulator. But for this much smaller, much more manageable rounds, what we feel, up to 5 million, which is a good number, then actually within the current legislation you can do that off the bat. And more importantly, not to forget, you get access to a crypto community. You get access to, they predict anywhere between 10 to 100,000 new active participants join the crypto community every day, right? So you get direct access to this community as well as staying within the current crowdfunding confines. You've got to bear in mind, if you are giving equity and you are allowing equity, the investors are shareholders and will have a greater degree of rights, right? You can put them in under sort of B shares and various other share instruments that sort of contain their rights, but nonetheless they have rights, so you will have a greater level of transparency and due diligence to offer your investors, right? On the flip side, the community is able to help build the business because they feel that much more involved and have that much more say. And the part that I had to largely strip out, but which is that the investors can actually act as a DAO, right? So this investor base can become your decentralized autonomous organization, which can carry out a lot of the functions that you don't have to internalize, right? And a larger investor base is going to create a larger community as a result. So the future's arrived. What you've been starting to see in this first instance is the first sort of this, what we call whitelisting process, was this sort of inclination to move towards what the regulator is requesting. And the regulation that's been done on the soft track, which is forcing everyone to create a utility, may not necessarily be the best step where you can actually have this dual solution. So utility is great where there's a need for utility, but to force utility on a token that doesn't require utility is kind of what the problem we're solving here, right? And actually the regulators, from our conversation, the regulator is very enthused by the fact that there is a secondary market. And that secondary market ensures that there's liquidity, there's access to it. That, we were originally in the anticipation when we were going to meet the regulators that they would be fearful of a secondary market, but actually that's something they want to actively encourage within the space, right? We will be doing a POC just to sort of test the water with the regulators around the world and seeing what they feel, what we can feed back into the sandbox. And we'll just have a sort of working title as Token X on that, right? So yeah, just before I wrap up, all eyes don't have to go in one direction, right? There's no need for us to look at ICOs as an isolated event, just based within crypto, just within blockchains. No, there's an existing, as big, if not larger movement, crowdfunding, which can be absorbed into crypto. As a result, the actual marketplace is going to potentially be 10x the size we've got currently. And we can do that today, right? So thank you for your time, and I look forward to